The alarm hit before I even set the crate down, a screaming frequency that dropped every soldier in the corridor to their knees like their legs had simply stopped working. My hands were still shaking from it when the doors at the end of the hall blew open, and something came through them that made my whole body go cold. My name is Dorian Ashford, and I have spent 11 years as a salvage technician for the Hollow Fleet, picking through wreckage for anything worth keeping. That morning, in the ruins of Sector 9, I found a small broken toy buried under a collapsed metal beam. One eye was shattered. Its little arms were bent the wrong way. Half of it was scorched black by something that had tried, a long time ago, to destroy it completely. It did not glow. It did not respond to my scanner. By every rule I had ever learned, it was junk, nothing more than a piece of trash left behind in a battlefield. My partner, a big, impatient man named Callum Beckett, did not even look up from the pile of real salvage he was sorting. "Get rid of it," he said. "Nothing on the manifest about toys." I should have listened to him. Instead, out of some small curiosity I could not explain, I turned the little thing over in my hands. There were markings on its underside, sharp little symbols in a language I did not recognize. The metal near its chest was worn smooth, the way an object becomes smooth only after years of being held by someone who loved it. I did not think much of it. I dropped it into the scrap crate along with the rest of the debris, and Callum and I moved on to the next pile. That was the mistake that nearly cost me everything. We were still 3 corridors away from the processing bay when the alarm went off, the kind of sound that does not belong to any battle. It was a high, aching frequency that made every soldier around me freeze mid-step, as if some invisible hand had reached out and grabbed their spines. I had never heard anything like it in 11 years of service. Then the doors ahead of us tore open, and she walked through. I had never seen the Queen of the Hollow Fleet in person before that day. Almost none of us had. She ruled from the High Command Tower, a distant figure known only through old broadcasts and formal portraits. Always calm, always composed, always the picture of a leader who had united 40 broken clans through sheer will after years of terrible war. In every image I had ever seen, she looked unshakable. The woman storming down that corridor did not look unshakable at all. She looked like someone had reached into her chest and torn something loose. "Who touched it?" she said, and her voice cracked the wall panels beside her. "Who touched the crate from Sector 9? I did not raise my hand. I did not need to. Callum, without a single moment of hesitation, pointed straight at me. She crossed the distance between us faster than anyone her size should have been able to move, and for one long, terrible second, I was certain I was about to be punished for the crime of throwing away a broken toy. Instead, she dropped to her knees right there on the scrap bay floor, in front of every technician and soldier who had come running to see what the noise was about, and lifted the small, dented, one-eyed object out of the crate as if it were made of glass. She pressed it against her chest and made a sound I had never heard a person make before. I still do not have a word for it. Nobody in that bay moved, nobody breathed. Then, without lifting her eyes from the object cradled in her arms, she spoke, and her voice had gone quiet in a way that felt worse than the shout before it. "Do you understand what this is?" I said nothing, because I had already learned, in the space of a few seconds, that this was not a question that wanted an answer from me. 40 years ago, she said, I was not a queen. I was a prisoner. Soldiers from another world held a defensive line for 8 months against 3 of our fleets, and when that line finally broke, I was one of many taken alive instead of being killed where I stood. We had been told, by our own commanders, that surrender meant death. We had been told that mercy from the enemy did not exist. She turned the little toy gently in her hands, the same careless way I had turned it just an hour before, and something cold settled low in my stomach as I watched her. There was a young man on guard duty in the holding block where I was kept. He had every reason to hate us. His unit had lost people to weapons built by my people, but he was young, and the nights were long, and eventually he began speaking to me, not questioning me, just talking, about his home, about a sister he missed, about this small object which she had given him before he left, so that he would not feel alone out there among the stars. On the night before his unit was reassigned somewhere else, he pressed it into my hands instead, and told me that I looked more frightened than he had ever felt in his life. The bay had gone completely silent. Even the air systems seemed to have stopped moving. I never learned what happened to him after that, she continued. I was moved 3 days later. I never had the chance to properly thank him. She stopped for a moment, then steadied herself and went on. This small, broken thing survived an attack that took the lives of almost everyone else in that holding block. I was the only one who walked away. I dug it out of the wreckage of the transport myself, with my own hands, and I have kept it for 40 years, because it is the only proof I have that during the worst conflict our two peoples have ever known, One young man chose to be kind to an enemy when every order and every instinct told him not to. The thing we were always told could never happen, kindness from the other side, happened to me. She lifted her eyes then, and they found mine, and I understood, with a kind of clarity I had never felt before, exactly how close I had come to destroying something that could never be replaced. "You called it garbage," she said, and there was no anger in her voice, which somehow made it harder to bear. "You were not wrong that it no longer works, but you were very wrong about what it is." I stood there in that scrap bay, surrounded by silent soldiers and broken machine parts, and I felt something shift inside me that I still cannot fully explain. I had spent 11 years learning to judge the worth of things by whether they still functioned, whether they still carried power, whether a scanner still read a signal from them. I had never once considered that the most valuable object in an entire fleet could be something that did nothing at all, something that simply existed as proof that a single act of kindness had once happened in the middle of a war that was supposed to have none. She did not punish me. I learned later that Callum received a harsher reprimand than I did, for the disrespect in his voice when he told her to throw it away, though I do not think either of us felt any better about the whole affair. What I remember most clearly is not the fear I felt in that corridor, or the shame of watching her kneel on a dirty floor because of something I had carelessly discarded. What I remember is standing there and watching the most powerful person in the Hollow Fleet hold a piece of broken plastic like it was the last living thing in the universe, and finally understanding something that no broadcast, no history lesson, and no commander had ever told me. We had all grown up hearing about the weapons the other side used, the tactics, the losses, the long years of fighting that had shaped every part of our lives. Nobody had ever told us about kindness, how it could cross a battlefield, survive years of silence, and still be treasured by a queen decades later as the single most precious thing she owned. After that day, I never handled a piece of salvage carelessly again. I began checking every marking, every worn edge, every small detail that might tell me something about who had once held an object and why it had mattered to them. I started asking myself what a thing might have meant to someone before deciding what it was worth to me. The queen kept the toy in a small case near her personal quarters after that, I was told, though I never saw it myself again. She had it repaired, not to work, but simply to be whole, its broken eye replaced with a matching lens, its bent limbs straightened by careful hands. She did not ask for it to function. She only wanted it to look, once more, the way it had looked on the night a stranger gave it to her out of simple, unasked-for compassion. I think about that guard sometimes, the young man she described, whoever and wherever he ended up. I wonder if he ever thought about the woman he had comforted in that holding block, if he ever wondered whether his small act of kindness had meant anything at all. I like to imagine that somewhere, even now, there might be a record of him, a name in some old file that no one has thought to look at in years. I heard, from soldiers who worked closer to her than I ever did, that the Queen still checks old peace treaty records and old prisoner lists whenever they cross her desk, quietly, without telling anyone why, hoping one day to find a name that matches the face she still remembers so clearly. I do not know if she ever found him. I was never told, and it was not my place to ask. But I know that whatever answer she found, or did not find, that small object remained the truest treasure in her possession, more valuable to her than any weapon, any ship, any piece of territory her fleets had ever won. It was not valuable because of what it could do. It was valuable because of what it proved, that even in the middle of the worst years either of our people had ever lived through, one person had chosen gentleness over fear, and that choice had outlived the war itself. I still work in salvage. I still spend my days sorting through wreckage, deciding what to keep and what to discard, but I no longer make that decision quickly. I have learned that the most important things are rarely the ones that shine, or hum, or respond to a scanner. Sometimes the most important thing in an entire fleet is a small, broken, quiet object that no longer does anything at all, except remind someone, every single day, that kindness once happened when it was never supposed to. I do not know what became of that young soldier, and I probably never will. But I know that somewhere in the story of that war, in a place history books rarely bother to look, there is a small act of gentleness that outlasted every battle fought around it. I was almost the one who threw it away, without ever understanding what it meant. I will spend the rest of my life making sure I never make that mistake again. You never really know which broken thing might turn out to be a monument. I learned that lesson on the floor of a scrap bay, watching a queen weep quietly over a piece of plastic that everyone else in the room had been ready to call garbage. It is a lesson I carry with me still, in every crate I open, in every piece of wreckage I lift from the dust, in every small and forgotten thing that might, to someone, somewhere, mean everything in the world.